Hello, everyone. Welcome to this month's EdNet Forum. And we are very excited to have two people that we know well. And hopefully you will know them as well by the end of this 90-minute presentation. The topic is community resilience training. And I'm just excited to see a couple of people that we haven't seen for a while. So I just am letting in Hyacinth, who's actually here from London. Um, and if others who are here, if you would just identify where you're calling in from, that would be wonderful, especially for Elaine and Laura to know, because I think that we probably know most people who are coming in. Um, the the program today is, as I said, community resilience model, and it's a training model, and there's also a component model with trauma resilience. So we have the experts who are with us. So certainly, the expert is Elaine Miller-Karas. Sorry to be a little distracted as I'm letting people in. We have someone here with a wonderful Chinese identification. So that's brilliant. Um, Elaine is someone I didn't really, in way of touching flesh, but encountered her in India at the launch of C-Learning, which is social, emotional, ethical learning, where she gave an incredible presentation for the launch of that program, which is really endorsed and in conjunction with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And she did a brilliant presentation on the Zowl, which you probably will be hearing about momentarily. Her work is so influential all over the world, and I think that you'll find that as we go through today's presentation. And then Laura Burgis, who is the chair of our Board of Trustees, and Laura actually is a certified person who's been working with Elaine off and on. And so what you're going to have is a full presentation, and it'll probably go for 40-45 minutes. And please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat. Probably the best place for that to happen. And Laura's going to be monitoring those questions, and we'll see if we'll incorporate the questions in the presentation, or we might wait until the very end where we'll have a good 20 minutes or so to interact with one another. So I'm not going to take any more time. Elaine, if you would like, I can put up the agenda, but it probably isn't really necessary as much as doing the PowerPoint itself.
I think so.
Uh,
So I'll just bring up the PowerPoint
okay, so I'll turn it over to you.
okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having us, having myself and Laura, that we are going to be the CRIM teachers today. I am so delighted that Laura's with me because Laura recently became a community resiliency model teacher. And what I love about when people become CRIM teachers is that how well they can start teaching the model right away. And so Laura is also a colleague. So this is the first time we're presenting together. So I'm kind of excited about that. And we, of course, spent a good bit of time preparing for today. So I'm going to go ahead and get the PowerPoint up. And again, I'm so grateful to be here today. And, what's so interesting, Marilyn, when you're talking about the launch of C-Learning, I think the other thing that I did besides the zone of well-being uh, discussion is I got everybody up and dancing because we heard a lot of academic information. And it's really wonderful to see a group of, I don't know, 1,500 people. And we sang, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. And it's one of those memories that are etched in my mind. And as I think about it, I'm going to do a little bit of tracking right now that we're going to explain to you in just a second. Oh my goodness, I can just feel my muscles relax and I feel this sense of well-being. And I think it's right here in my heart. And I'm noticing that as I'm just even touching my heart. So all this little presentation that I'm doing right now will also make a little bit more sense to you as we get into the material today. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up the PowerPoint. And here we are. One of our newly minted community resiliency model teachers recently said, Elaine, the community resiliency model, what it really is, it's practical skills for cultivating our well-being. And I just love the way that she said it so simply. And I think that's what we've tried to do as we bring this information forward to you. But I want to tell you a little bit about the Trauma Resource Institute. I started it, I can't believe it, almost 20 years ago. It will be 20 years next year. But we are what we call a resiliency and trauma-informed organization. And we'll say more about what that means as we go through the presentation. But we have core values of our organization, and that is service. And Marilyn, you said it. We work internationally. We are here to serve our amazing community that we work with worldwide. But we also are we have so embedded in our organization social justice, dignity, respect, and the worth of every person, family, and community. So we have been so many places on earth where sometimes people live in those spaces of shame. And what we try to help them see the sacredness that lives within us, how we can shift into our compassion and our understanding of self and others that actually helps us to be our very best selves as we work within our own communities and as we are raising families and doing all the amazing things that we do around the world. So those are our core values. And I want to start with this question, these questions actually, um, as we get started, is to take a moment to reflect on what or who uplifts you, what or who brings you joy, what or who helps you through difficult times. You don't have to answer each question, but maybe there's one that stands out to you. But just for a moment, I'm going to be silent for you to reflect on what your answer or answers may be to those questions.
And as you're thinking about this, it can be a positive memory, a person, a place, real or imagined, but something that gives you courage and strength. And as you're thinking about that, what do you notice inside you? Just reflecting on that answer, do you notice things going on in your body and just kind of hone in on that? It's considered a little bit of light tracking.
Laura, as you asked those questions, I noticed that I took a deeper breath. And, what I was thinking of as I was working, I was speaking to two amazing women from Altadena who are involved with two church groups, and they've been working very hard since the fires. And one of them told me about her her service and her mission is to find people that are suffering. And she told a story, an experience of a man whose house had burnt down. He was living in his car. And she asked him, "What do you need?" He said, "Oh, I don't need anything." And then she found that that wasn't the right question. She said, "Well, can I get you a tent? Can I get you a cooler? Could I get you some camp chairs?" And she realized that he was too overwhelmed to actually be able to answer that question, what do you need? But when she asked the specific things, she said she put a call out to her church community. And literally, she said within about 2 hours, she had everything that this gentleman needed to be a bit safer in his living surroundings and also maybe a little bit more nourished. So, can you see that breath I just took, Laura, all the way? I could sense it right here.
Yeah, and that's actually a resource. That's a resource to feel that. So
Yes.
hopefully everyone here on the call is just getting an introduction to what we're talking about here.
All right. So, the wellness skills of the community resiliency model, we have 6 wellness skills. And one of the things that you will hear us say, and if you decide that you really want to learn the skills and have a practice with the skills, that we've seen it used across the lifespan, during and after, the terrible things that happen in our lives, disasters that we certainly am experiencing in my community right now. We've seen it across cultures with people with different abilities. Um, we've seen it used in spaces for community healing and with diverse people. I always love to tell a little story about my father-in-law who was 105 when he passed. He lived at our house, and he had knees that were not the best. He had an injury when he was a kid. And he'd say, "Oh, Elaine, my knees are hurting me." And I'd say, "Oh, Kenny, I'm so sorry about your knees." And then I'd say, "But you just push that walker all over the house." And I noticed that you seem to have really strong arms. And he said, and he'd go, "Oh," and he'd move his arms up and down. He goes, "I do have really strong arms." And then I'd say, "Well, I just think you have stronger arms than me. And I think anybody else in the house." And you'd see a big smile and you'd see that deep breath come in. And, then he wouldn't be talking about his knees so much. And he goes, "My knees don't hurt so much." So there's ways that we can cultivate our well-being that can be very simple. And when I see that how we can use these very simple skills across the lifespan, even with small ones, it certainly does touch my heart. Laura, do you want to say anything about what you've seen and using the skills? Because you just brought this to the colleges, and that
Yeah,
was
I'll I'll
amazing.
I'll just say that just an overview as we're getting started into this introduction that CRIM is something that is very accessible to young people, old people, educated people, people freaking out about whatever's going on in their life. It's very simple. I call it sticky. It stays with you. You can very quickly say, I know how to track and resource and do all these things that we'll walk through with you. But I will share that we are bringing that to college students. We are bringing that to the Latina community in Southern California who are dealing with really high anxiety issues. And I think the more we introduce this to you, the more you too will see some of those really validating principles of it.
Thank you, Laura. Well, so we have 6 skills. We're not going to be able to share all the skills with you today, but we're going to share a few of them. But they really are literally in the palms of your hand. I always like to say, "Oh, I didn't create this slide. It was created by Nobuko Hattori from Japan." And the first time I saw it, it was in Japanese. And I said, "Oh my gosh, that's a brilliant way to talk about our skills." She's actually just publishing a book about the community resiliency model in Japanese. I'm so excited for it. I just wrote the foreword for her. But we also have an app, and the app is free, and we're going to be expanding more languages, but right now it's in English, Spanish, Ukrainian, Arabic, Hebrew, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll have it in simple Chinese, Korean, Haitian, and Portuguese. So we keep adding more languages as we get the funding for them. So there's more in the works, but I just love this graphic about you can have these skills to use anytime, anywhere, and they are in the palms of your hand. Now, I'm going to speak about resiliency because when I first created this model, oh my gosh, 20 years ago, resiliency wasn't so overused. One time I was in Belfast. I was about to do our first community resiliency model teacher training. And this woman comes up to me and she says, "Elaine," she says, "we have a billboard in our community. It says, if anybody calls you resilient, run the other way. It's just the government trying not to acknowledge our suffering or to give services to us." And I'm going, "Oh my." And then, of course, since then, in many places around the world, resilience has become a word that for some people has been weaponized. So I thought hard about should we change the word, but decided to keep it. I think the word is still a good word, but I think I need to describe what it means for the community resiliency model. And the most fundamental thing about what it means is embodied well-being. Just even that little exercise that we just did, and I, was sharing with you what I noticed inside as I thought of that sweet story of service and compassion. And so when we have embodied well-being, there's an amazing thing that happens, and it's a sacred moment that I've seen all over the world. And we now have research that says, oh my goodness, we have statistically significant increases in compassion and forgiveness when people start monitoring their nervous system, paying attention to their well-being. So that increase in compassion and empathy starts with the self first. And then when you have compassion for self, we can see compassion in others. And that's how it spreads. And the scalability of the model has been so touching to me as people learn it and want others to learn it. but it also does not mean that we don't acknowledge individual and collective suffering, whether something is happening right now or whether there's historical suffering, which we see, of course, all over the world. But it's also not staying there. It's saying, all right, this existed. We can do the deep listen, but we can also shift our awareness to what are individual and collective strengths. And that when we do that and we have that embodied well-being, a neuroscientist explained it to me, there's more blood flow coming into the prefrontal cortex. When that happens, we as human beings are more solution focused. And the result is optimism, hope, flexibility. I remember being in the Philippines after a terrible typhoon, Hunan, that they had there. And this one woman came up to me and she says, I really like these skills. Thank you for reminding me what I already knew but had forgotten. But did you know that the Philippines and the Filipinos are the happiest people on earth? I said, I didn't know that. And I just love that by, kind of being reminded of the skills also reminded her of her happiness, even with the chaos on suffering. And I think that is one of the things that certainly keeps me going. I have been to so many spaces around the world where there's been so suffering, but seeing people being able to embody their well-being can absolutely be life altering for all of us as humans. But the other thing that we have really focused on in our model, and this is people very much, and maybe you've had presentations on being trauma informed. Um, but we talk about being also resiliency informed. And also, I started thinking about this paradigm shift is that there's an assumption that I see all over the world that when people do certain things, oh, that person is just bad and they need to be punished. We have a prison system in the United States based on that premise. So, what is wrong with that person? Get them away from society. But then the awareness of trauma informed was so important, not only within the states where the first research was done, but globally people are suffering. How can we help people learn that trauma impacts a child's development and that takes it into adulthood, and that we can ask that important question about what happened to you? But then what we have done with the community resiliency model, I'm going to call it CRIM here on out because it's a long word. Resiliency informed, based on the definition I just gave to you, is that people are resilient. They can cultivate their well-being. They can learn skills that can help to reduce their suffering, that has a ripple effect to their families and to the wider community. And so we say, well, what's right about you? What are your strengths? We just did a project in the juvenile justice system in the state of Georgia with young people that are incarcerated. And it was so enlightening for us to ask those questions for kids that had done things that got them into some trouble, but also to see that they had a different possibility for their present and their future. And so then the reflection is that people can change and grow. People can learn to read their own nervous systems to build resiliency in themselves and others. And people can learn, and this is what also is the byproduct of nervous system regulation, is they can learn that they can compassionately listen to another's lived experience that actually can not only help them balance their own nervous system, but others in how we show up as empathic, compassionate human beings in our world. Right. So, okay, over to you, Laura. She's going to talk about our common language.
Sure. And I want to just first acknowledge what you just shared because what Elaine was also talking about is in light of the suffering, despite the suffering, what else is true? What else is true? And it's something that I think really can help uplift us. So, at the core of this CRIM model, Community Resilience Model, we're calling CRIM, is this notion of a zone, right? So, as you see the graph there, this is kind of our resilience zone, our okay zone, our well-being zone. And the goal for us is that we want to widen that zone. We want to not be so wired that it's so narrow that anything can jump out of there. So if we could go to that next slide, what we're really talking about the description of that zone, if you will, is where you feel like you can handle life, right? So this kind of shows different emotions we might have, but we're still okay, right? Life isn't always about being perfectly happy and everything is zen. You can be excited, you can be sad, you can be mad. All these things can happen, but you can still control your life, right? You feel like you can still handle what's going on. What we really get what we're addressing with this model is when you're really in the high zone or the low zone. So I'm going to go to that next screen because it's when trauma or stress gets to us where it sticks and we start staying really, really in the high zone or really, really in the low zone. I'm curious for anyone who's on the call today who can, I guess, maybe relate to being a little bit in the high zone, having a little bit of anxiety or mania, outbursts. Can anyone relate to that? I have an autistic son, and this model has been really helpful working with him because sometimes we can be getting out of our zone and start to recognize these things. The same could be said for being in our low zone. The low zone, you might recognize, you know, in yourself or in others, a sense of disconnection, not really being yourself, even a numbness or depression. And so, what we want to do is grow that resilience zone, that sweet spot in the middle, and make it wider and grow that capacity so that you can handle more. I feel like my brother-in-law has this really narrow one where the slightest thing just sets him off, and he's just boom, we all have these people in our lives, right? And even ourselves, we have to acknowledge that. Like, but see, this helps you start to say, how did that happen? Why did that happen? And just acknowledging that there is this beautiful place that we can grow, where we can handle more, and recognize that as a capacity building space.
I also just want to add, Laura, this is not a static state. So it shifts during the day. And I remember when my mom was dying, I took care of her at the house when she was at the end of her life. And my zone was probably like this. It was very narrow. And I remember my husband coming home and going, "Hey, what's for dinner?" Oh my goodness. I was not a very nice person how I responded to him. And I had to apologize to him later. I definitely went into my high zone because I got bumped out of my resilient zone very quickly because it was so narrow that because of what was happening to us in our life. And I think it's really important that we all know that we can all be in any of these zones. I think it's when we get stuck there is when it's problematic for our life. But also connected to these zones are sensations. That when I'm in my high zone, when I'm getting there, my ears get hot. That's such a funny thing. My ears get hot. But we even have colloquialisms, right, in our language that say, "Oh, he really heated up," right? So our nervous system does get heated up when we get into different experiences. But when I sense my ears getting hot, I go, "Oops, I better get myself grounded," or I do one of the skills that can help really regulate my nervous system, and I can then start sensing that cooling down. So I think that the zones help us talk about this in such a simple way. And I want people to know too. So we call it the zone of well-being. Children call it the OK zone. I know that with C learning and CBCT, they call it the ZOW zone, zone of well-being. I love to say what it's the Spanish word, la zona de bienestar, because that's also the zone of well-being. So at Virginia Tech, where they've integrated the model, they call it the flow zone because the students didn't like resilient zone. So when people take our training, I say, well, just make sure you define it the same way in terms of the bones of the model. But we also try to invite people to contextualize this model to their community. One of my most wonderful memories of my life is being in Nepal after the earthquake and seeing these wonderful Nepalese talking about what they were going to call it. And then they finally decided, and if you've ever seen the language of Nepal, it is the most beautiful, like artistic expression of language. And they wrote it on a big, huge white paper, and they put it in the front of the building of the workshop that we were in. I of course didn't know what it meant, but I knew what it meant for what they told me and what I saw them sense as they said they were getting into their zone of well-being. So I love that we can call it different things, Laura.
And I think that's so important for, this global community that while we can really draw from the core lessons and tools of the community resilience model, but also be able to have a little bit of flexibility in things like that, like language, and helping it relate to the community that you're in and not to me, that's very decolonizing. I love that because it's like you take it and you run with it and you own it. and this is not a top-down approach.
And I think that that's why we are like in 77 plus countries. I think it's because of that. People can take it and integrate it into the things, into what they're doing that's important to them, but also into their language. And I learned early on where I was going to the Philippines, and I said, well, what language should I get the materials translated? They translated into. They go, oh, everybody speaks English. And so when I got there, that's not true, by the way. And so there's so many dialects in the Philippines that we ended up being in the areas where the typhoon had hit the hardest. We ended up translating our materials into four different languages of the Philippines so that it could be really adapted and used in their activities of daily living. So I always like to say a little bit about mirror neurons. Do you want to say a little bit about it, Laura? I just love mirror neurons.
Please speak to them, but I will just say this also underscores this is biology-based human experience.
Well, what I'm a licensed clinical social worker by profession. And, some of the etiology of me creating this model was I was a teacher of family medicine at a large hospital in California. And my job was to teach the family practice residents all about the behavioral science. And when I was doing that, I realized that if I came in as a social worker, that sometimes they saw what I did as a soft science. So I really started to be a student, and I become kind of like a amateur neuroscience geeky kind of person now. I like to read about it as much as I can. And when I first read about mirror neurons, oh, it made so much sense to me. But I started talking to the residents about it because I was trying to help them also. How do they socially engage with their clients in order to even get the right information to be able to care for their clients? But so mirror neurons, it's a neuron, and a neuron is a brain cell that fires both when a person takes an action and a person observes the same action being made by another. So the neuron mirrors the behavior of the other as though the observer were itself acting. So, for example, if I smiled right now, some of you may smile back and say, oh, look at Marilyn just smiled. So did Laura. I can see that. Thank you. They smiled back. But if I'm like really glum and I'm sad, that also my nervous system impacts other people's nervous system. And I'm not saying that I'm talking about, oh, we need to be always positive and in our zone of well-being, because that's not being human. But when we understand that there's a feedback loop, I think it helps us understand why it's important for all of us to cultivate our well-being so that we can, show up in the world as the person we want to be. And that also, that when we are struggling, I might call a friend. And like I can think of a friend that I would call up that if I was having one of those days out of my zone, and when I talk to her, that she has a way of helping me regulate my nervous system. Now, those aren't words that we kind of, oh, you're helping me regulate my nervous system. I don't say those words out loud, but there's something that happens inside of me when when I see her smile. And I love that I can have a Zoom now where I can actually see her smile and that we can have a conversation that there is, but I don't even have to see someone to hear the breath or to hear a smile, because there is something about that nervous system regulation that we can also experience through the airways. So, Laura, I think we want to have them see what zone they could be in right now. So,
Okay, are we going to resource?
not yet.
Yeah. Okay, well, are we going to ask everyone to feel
What zone are they in?
something that uplifts them and just kind of a check-in maybe? Should we start there with a
Well, the
check?
check-in is just like with what we've explained with the zones. Are you in your zone of well-being right now?
So for everyone on the call, and as we kind of shared that beautiful graph of, sort of this is where it's really high and this is where it's really low. Maybe in the chat, if you just want to share where you are and let us know what you notice, what's going on inside of you, and where you are in your zone. That could be an emoji. You could just give us a score or something like that, but just kind of a check-in. Where are you in your resilience zone or your well-being zone? Marilyn's in the middle.
I'm in my zone, but I'm a little bit the higher of my zone because I can feel the energy of being here. So it feels actually pleasant.
And so, Marita, see, isn't that interesting? That's great, Marita, because that's an awareness of I've been in my well-being zone, but I just got something that is spiking me. And just that awareness alone is such an important aspect of this model Katie is here because she's struggling, and I hope that this tool will help you, Katie. Lynn is feeling a little low. We know she's under the weather. And again, that's really recognizing what's going on in the body, how it's affecting us, mind, body, spirit, everything else. Uh,
Yeah.
it's important to note that. And there's no judgment in any of this either.
And I think what's important for us is there is no judgment and that zones just exist. And it's just an awareness. It's another way that we can tune in to knowing more about ourselves. And also we can make a decision. Sometimes we might even want to say, I just need to be here in this experience right now. And for some of us, we would go, well, gee, I've got to go do all these different things. Are there some ways that I can get maybe into the middle of my zone of well-being? Because boy, do I have a lot to do today. So, and we're going to be talking about skills shortly. But before we do that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the key concepts and what the model is made. Here we go. So it's about biology versus mental weakness. When I was working with the residents, I'd said it's about biology versus pathology. That's a word that they knew. But what I've seen all over the world, that there are common human reactions to stressful, traumatic events that affect the mind, body, and spirit. And one of the learnings that came when I was traveling so much around the world when I was first starting Try is I would ask these 6 questions. What are some of the common emotional, thinking, physical, behavioral, spiritual, and relationship reactions that you've observed in others since this trauma happened, since the disaster happened? I was initially responding as I first was creating CRIM to natural disasters. I was in Thailand after the Asian tsunami. I've talked about the Philippines, Nepal. Um, but do you know that all over the world, people said exactly the same thing? Whether I was in a culture like Nepal or whether I was in the United States or England, that they would give the same answers. I'm not going to read every single one, but I'm going to highlight the physical reactions. I was working in family medicine. People were coming into the medical clinic saying, I can't sleep. There's something wrong with my belly. My stomach's upset all the time. Sometimes I start to shake and I don't know why. I feel numb. I think there's something wrong. I have a pain in my chest. The doctors would do big workups and say there's nothing wrong with them. It's in their head. Well, that didn't seem to be quite the right answer because that was really prompted me to do more research about neuroscience and that mind-body connection. So all those physical reactions are quite common after a crisis or if we experience a disaster. So when we can reframe that experience of saying, oh, it's a common. I see this in LA right now that people have problems sleeping since the fires. It's very hard to kind of settle your nervous system because it can be feeling jacked up all the time into the high zone or going between high and low. So when we know that these are common reactions, it helps to reframe an experience of, oh, that's why that's happened since that event. And of course, having that information is one piece of it. It's like the trauma informed piece. But then what do we do with that when that happens, which becomes important? But I can remember a young man in Haiti saying, Elaine, you mean that people in America have these same reactions as people in Haiti? And I said, yes, they do. And I say that because I've heard that so many times because this is our common humanity, our common experience. This is every place on the globe we experience similar things. We may call them something a little bit different, but the same kind of reactions. So go ahead, Laura. Do you have a
I was just going to say, you've worked in such high trauma places, Elaine, and
how?
the things that we're doing is we're assuming everyone has been touched and has experienced trauma. The fact that we've all survived COVID in itself is a collective trauma. And so I love that we can just assume that people understand suffering on some level.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because, one of the reasons why I call the community resiliency model, and I didn't put trauma in the word, is because my dear mother, who passed a number of years ago, immigrated. My mother and grandmother immigrated from El Salvador to San Francisco during World War II. They were Rosie the Riveters. And I still can't imagine my mom doing that because she didn't do that very long. She ended up getting a job pouring coffee at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco. And the reason why my name is Elaine is because the waitress that taught my mom English was named Elaine. But if you would have said to my mom, Elsie, I think you've had trauma. You need to go see a therapist. She would have probably reacted in a very fiery way and said, I don't have, what do you mean I have trauma? Did she have trauma? Yes, she did, but she didn't call it that. And she said, well, that's stress or that's just life. We are all, we live in different cultures. We live in different, experiences, and that we may call that trauma in the West, but people may say, she would have said, Elena Diana, that's just life. And I said, okay, mom. Of course, here I become a social worker, right, to help people with trauma. But I think that distinction when we're bringing something forward, Laura, is so important, is that we may have stress, we may have lived experience, but we may not call it trauma. But we do have common reactions. And you notice I didn't say, I didn't even put trauma on that slide before, because I think if we reframe it for people, it's a portal to help people come to us to understand how we may be able to help them with learning just simple wellness skills. And so the wellness skills and the model is based on, it's really organic. The natural rhythms in nature, right, exist also within the human nervous system. I made this graphic and it has the seasons. We have seasons. We have cycles of the moon. If you live near an ocean, you've seen the ocean waves come towards the shore and recede. And so these are all natural states. And also in all these experiences in nature, we also have storms, and there can be storms in our body. And for those of us who've experienced a lot of stress or the word trauma, we can feel like we are trapped by the stress that lives within us that we can never heal. But I'm here to say that I have learned that when we can start to tell the difference between sensations of distress and well-being, it opens up an aha awareness that it can actually be something that we now have an avenue for healing, the healing of our heart, our minds, and our bodies that also are linked and that can go together. So I talk about the stress response. I remember when I was talking to those young doctors, they understood this. So I said, oh, okay, so what happens physiologically when we have that stress response? Um, so traumatic individual and communal experiences result in the stress response. And I describe it in the model. I don't use psychological language. I use positive, tolerable, and toxic stress. And I'm going to explain a little bit to that, explain that to you right now. So, and this really is important because it refers to the stress response system in the body, not to the actual event. And that helps people understand why it can still live, even though the event happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And the body is designed, we're designed to survive. And we're designed that our body sounds an alarm when we could be in danger or being experiencing something that is similar to something that happened to us that was an existential moment that we perceived as perhaps being a life and death event, or that we became really scared. Like one of my very scared moments was the dentist. Now, I wasn't going to die from the dentist, but that drill scared this little girl that lived inside of me. So guess how that resulted in my behavior? Not going to the dentist very frequently. I've got lots of crowns. I wish I would have gone more frequently, but things happen to us that can influence our behaviors and how we do things. So, wellness skills can be an antidote to the stress response. And many of you have many skills on this call that you've been using for your life that help you. And so these are additional ones that can also be integrated into your life when we get to that point. But here's the definition. Positive stress, maybe you had to take a test. You could feel your nervous system getting a little jacked up. Okay, I'm ready. I've studied. I take the test. I passed the test. So my body returns quickly to a homeostatic balanced state. But when we have that brief stress response, we might have an elevated heart rate. Or if we had a blood pressure cuff, our blood pressure would be up. And we have stress hormones that are released because we need a little bit more activity and action in our body to respond to the stressor of the test. So, but then there's tolerable stress. It's a time-limited stress response results in short-acting changes. So all those things happen in the nervous system, but the balance doesn't happen as quickly. So I'll use a personal example, but I don't know if it's tolerable, but I think it is. I have to limit watching the news because if I watch the news for too long, my body does not return to balance quickly unless I'm really intentional about practicing my skills. I might actually need to, maybe I'll call Laura, say, Laura, I need to talk to someone right now. Can I talk to you for a few minutes, right? So I can feel that with the help of a support system, I can get back into my zone of well-being. And many of you have friends, something that you do. I got two lovely dogs I can have sit on my lap. Many of us have fur babies that help us, but I might need something a little extra. But toxic stress is what we see all over the world these days. It's ongoing and relentless body responses to intense stressors. So that activation of the nervous system is no longer short acting. It's only meant for short action. So that prolonged activation of the stress response systems in the absence of other protective factors can result in cortisol. It can levels being pumped into the system. It's like I like to describe it like, let's say, you're driving your car and you just are you put your foot on the accelerator and your foot is stuck on the accelerator of your car. So you don't even know you have a brake and you're going so fast that it's dangerous. And so when we have our the toxic stress response that our foot is on the accelerator of our nervous system, and that can happen without intention because of lived experience, it's not good for our immune system and we may not know that we have a break. So basically, the skills of CRIM are the break to the nervous system. And when you learn to use that with intention, you can turn off you can put that brake on so that toxic stress response isn't dysregulating your nervous system for the rest of your life. And so this is a very important element to know about. And you're getting a copy of all these slides. I really encourage you to read the article that this is based upon because I think it gives you a context, and especially for those of you that work with children and what happens to kids when they are growing up in situations that aren't good for their little nervous systems.
I just want to comment. I really love that metaphor of the break, Elaine. I haven't heard you use that before, and I think that really helps understand the way in which these skills can address what's going on. It doesn't take away the situation that you're faced with. It doesn't correct the situation, but the hitting the brakes a little bit is wonderful.
Yes, and I think too, Laura, I say another metaphor that I didn't say. You're just reminding me of it. When we're in that toxic stress response, it's also like we have, have you ever put your car into park and just just put your foot on the accelerator and gun the engine? So the car doesn't move and go forward, but it starts to shake. And you can feel the dysregulation of your car as you're doing that. And that is essentially a good description of what happens to us inside of our nervous system when we're in a toxic stress response, because it is a very dysregulated state that's not good for us. And some of us can be sitting quietly right now in on your sofa, on your chair, as you're listening to this, and you're going, oh, I never paid attention. My nervous system is jacked up. And I just got a lovely email from a person who just took our teacher training. And he had a terrible thing that happened to him 30 years ago where he witnessed the drowning of a family member. He was actually on the boat when the family member drowned. And he said, Elaine, I for 30 years, my nervous system has been numb. I didn't know I had another choice. I just thought it was the way I was since the event. He says, for the past 10 days, I'm aware of a new world that I didn't know was available to me. I mean, it was one of the most touching emails I've ever received. Um, and I think that's what's possible, that when we learn these skills for ourselves and when we share them with others, that it helps people access that well-being that's so essential for us as human beings. And that's here as a social worker, I have to tell you, I wasn't a big science geek when I was in high school. But I probably didn't get the best grade in biology. But now knowing about anatomy and physiology is really integral for all of us to know a little bit about the structures of body parts and their relationships to one another and the functions of the body, even understanding what I just said about cortisol and about your heart rate beating fast. And what if it gets stuck there? Because what we do in CRIM is we utilize the observation and knowledge of the nervous system's patterns to help clients track sensations and learn to distinguish between sensations of distress and well-being. So that's then understanding the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So if you were going to run a race, and you have to use all the energy in your body, you would be accessing your sympathetic nervous system that we need those muscles, right, in our arms and our legs to go. And that when that happens, our breathing accelerates, our heart rate accelerates. We have the stress hormones that are released in our body. We may start to sweat, and we don't need our digestion to be working in the same way. So it actually slows down. And also, we may have a dry mouth. And so, what we get into sympathetic hyperaroused states in that high zone, we can get stuck there. And when we get stuck there, we don't feel well. And that also can lead to all sorts of different, um, not only physical conditions, but also mental health conditions. So, accessing that parasympathetic, which is our break, helps us then to learn that we can rest and digest with intention, and we can learn how to put the brake on so that our breathing rate slows down, that we can feel our heart rate slowing, and we can feel our muscles relax. We can even start burping, sometimes even doing bottom burps, because our digestion comes back onto track again, and we start feeling the saliva in our mouth. So we help people understand their nervous system simply, so then they understand what's happening to them, and also how we help other people understand that. And so, as people are learning to track their nervous system, we also help people learn very simple information about their body. And about neuroscience. Neuroplasticity, big word, simple. What it means, the brain can change. You do not have to be trapped by the sensations that may be linked to your lived experience of trauma as a child or what has happened to you as an adult. And that research, and Linda Feldman Barrett, one of my favorite neuroscientists, um, who has really studied neuroscience and talks about what happens when we um, are delving into more positive experiences, is it can change the actual structure of the brain by increasing the number of connections between neurons, tuning your nervous system. So when Laura and I started with those questions in the beginning, there was a purpose of doing that because we want you to start thinking about what else is true, as Laura said, when you start spending time thinking about those answers and noticing the sensations connected to that. Because as we do that more and more, we prune the neural connections that aren't used, and so that actually it's the use it or lose it principle. And you can see in the graphic that I made that that pathway in nature is starting to disappear. Most of us have gone on hikes where we've seen a path that's not well used anymore. And then there's one that's very well honed. Well, the same thing is possible within our nervous system. And having that kind of information, like you can think of one little boy at the Covenant House in Atlanta who was transitioned out of foster care that said to their CRIM teacher, "You mean that I'm not broken? You mean that I'm not broken? It's because of the biology of my human nervous system, and I can tune my nervous system differently." That can be an aha moment that changes people's lives. So the other thing that's very important, I'm going to talk about these brain circuits, and then we're going to learn some skills. There is a wonderful book that I read called The Book of Joy, a dialogue between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. If you haven't read it, oh, please read it. It's such a great read. They also made a movie about it, but in it, they cite Dr. Richard Davidson, who's done a lot of work with His Holiness's monks about the resiliency circuits in their brain. But when I learned about this, is not only are we designed as human beings to remember the negative things that happen to us through our amygdala, our alarm system, but we are designed to remember the things in our lives that also nourish us. And that when we, with intention, like those three questions, when we call them up, and I'm going to focus on the generosity circuit. So, what he found is that when you engage in acts of generosity, when you observe acts of generosity or if someone's generous towards yourself, we have generosity circuits in our brain that light up. And that as we do that, we cultivate our well being. So think about things that we design for children or things that we design for ourselves. Or if you have a holiday coming up, what if you gathered your family and said, oh, let's think about our favorite generosity that we either observed, received, or gave in the last year, and how that might change the environment of of that small gathering. So there are ways that we can learn how to pay attention, how to um, cultivate our positive outlook circuitry and our resilience circuit that can, with practice, change and tune our nervous system to our well-being. So I am going to now move right into the basic skills. So Laura,
Yeah, so
oh,
the first, what are we doing here? Okay, let's see. So we were going to talk about tracking, which is really leads into resourcing. And so I wanted to ask Elaine, and this is kind of an example of how we can begin leaning into some of the most important skills. When we asked you at the very beginning about what uplifts you, a positive memory, I'm going to ask Elaine. Elaine, consider a resource for yourself, something um, that you can lean into as a resource and maybe share that with us.
yeah, I mean, I think because the holiday season is approaching, I'm thinking about my grandma. Her name was Eva Pineda, and we used to call her Abuelita Linda. And she was, oh my gosh, she was sweet and kind. She wasn't very complex, she just believed in nourishing and loving her family. And I remember when I was little that she would hold me in her arms, and she had beautiful brown eyes, and she would sing a lullaby, and it goes so I'm just like doing the little melody, but I sang the same lullaby to my kids when they were little. But these lullabies and I had someone recently in one of my trainings from El Salvador, and she goes, Elaine, I'll give you the link so you can listen to the whole thing, because I actually didn't know all the words, but I knew the lullaby. Oh, and I'm just, oh my goodness. So
And I'm watching you, Elaine. Look at you just light up. Your face is so lit up as you talk about your grandmother. You're holding your heart.
that's right here.
I can see smiles in your eyes. What
Yes.
else are you noticing as your
I'm also noticing a little wetness in my eyes, but they're not sad tears. They're like gratitude tears of just remembering the lovely soul that she was, and that she's still, with me. I have a picture of her on my desk. So even though, she's past this earth, she's still with me in spirit in such a lovely, amazing way.
And I might invite you to delve a little bit deeper into some of the sensations you're experiencing from these memories with her.
Oh gosh, my muscles just relaxed. And as you said that, I don't know if you saw, I sat straighter. I just felt, and I think that this often happens when people ask me about my resource, I'm more grounded. I
Mm.
feel more like in my core, like I feel like a strength in my core, which I
And what does that feel like, that strength in your
Oh, it's
core?
very pleasant. It's a very pleasant sensation. Yeah. And like if you notice that I yawned, so yawning is a release of the autonomic nervous system. And yawning has gotten a bad take. I know people would say, stop yawning, you're not paying attention. Actually, yawning helps to re-energize the brain and actually brings more oxygen to the prefrontal cortex. And because I said I was a bit excited in the higher part of my resilient zone, so my nervous system is settling more as I'm calling up my grandma, and I can
And
feel like more grounded now. I don't feel like I'm in the high part of my resilience zone now. I feel like I'm right in the center. Very
beautiful,
balanced. Yeah.
beautiful. And I just want to ask again, this is a pleasant experience in your body?
Gosh, it's really pleasant. Very, very pleasant. Yes. And so even though, it's interesting because it's like holding both too, because there's always a little bit of an etch of a little sorrow that I don't get to hug her in person anymore. But it doesn't change the fact that she was probably one of the most powerful resources in my life. And so you can see back to my heart again. That's like here's this kind of the sadness, but this the source of her love for me and how that still gives to me is still present. Oh, thank you, Laura. Oh, I didn't know I was going to get this today.
Yes. So for
Yeah.
our viewers and participants here, what I want to explain what we were just doing together is I asked Elaine for to draw upon a resource, and she drew upon a positive memory of a person that has significant influence in her life and her memories. And we delved a little bit into the sensations of her body. We got out of the head. We didn't say, tell me about your grandmother and when she grew up and when she died and all of the statistics. We delved into her body and we said, what was that experience in your body? And you saw what happened. It was authentic, it was real, and that regulates us, as she
And
shared.
I have to tell you, this is the funny part about it. It's a little indelicate, but we don't usually tell people when we burp, but I just burped. And that's so if we think about the autonomic nervous system again, right? The parasympathetic. So my nervous system is more regulated coming out of a little bit of a pleasant sympathetic experience, but a sympathetic nonetheless. And my body is in a just a definitely more balanced state. Digestion is coming back on track again. I can even feel more saliva in my mouth. I know that, here I'm trying to help you understand the tracking and talking about physical things, which is why knowing about the anatomy and physiology just a little bit can be really important for all of us.
And so just to recap what we just did here, we started with tracking. Tracking is just paying attention to what's going on in the body as she's sharing her resource. So the tracking is the basis of everything else. And those resources where are you in your resilience zone now, Elaine? Just
Oh, I am definitely right smack in the middle of my resilience zone, and it feels very good. Very, very good.
beautiful.
All right. So, Laura, was I going to talk about the tracking or were you? I can't remember the actual, I think I'm doing this part. Okay, good. Okay, so I want to talk about tracking in a little bit more detail. So think about this. I think as human beings, and many of us have been trained in different ways of helping ourselves and others. We may go on to therapists. I love to do Qigong, for example. But many of the things in terms of how to make people feel better has to do with people might say, well, what are you thinking about that now? Or can you tell me what you feel? And oftentimes, like here, I'm an old trauma therapist. I've been very well trained in asking people about how they feel, but I wasn't as well trained until the last 20 years or so about learning about the sensory system, about talking about what do we sense. And that body and mind continuum are so important. So what I'd like to start out by, before even getting into more detail about tracking, is that it's really important for all of us as human beings to add in this what we're sensing. And you saw how beautifully Laura asked me what I was noticing in my body, that actually, as I was thinking about my grandmother, created created more and more well-being inside of myself. Now, we also call this body literacy, and body literacy refers to attuning to sensations originating from within our own bodies, much like how we acquire reading literacy as a child. And when we can develop the ability to tune into these bodily sensations and really learn to decipher how our body sense influences our daily decisions and behaviors. And I want to say to this that for some of us, it's more difficult when we first learn this, because, and this may be true for some of you. So just to know that you can stop at any time, because when we start to learn about sensations, we can go, oh, I didn't know that one exists. That doesn't feel good. So for any time, if for any reason, paying attention to them does not feel good, you can just stop. But that doesn't mean I'm going to encourage you over time to try to find things that when you're doing them, like one of the first things that I noticed that I felt, I could notice sensations that were pleasant. I love to do the dishes. I love to have the warm, sudsy water on my hands. And I learned that that was a pleasant sensation. So there are things that can lead us to greater body literacy instead of necessarily saying, I need to talk about something or feel or tell you about feeling about something. Such an important thing. Oops. So, tracking is simply noticing and paying attention to what is happening inside in the present moment and determining if that sensation is pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And you saw that Laura asked me about if it was pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And that becomes a very important questions to start asking yourself. And because if you're by yourself learning this, I'm going to encourage you to sit or stay with sensations that are pleasant or neutral and start cultivating that part of your nervous system and start to be curious, to become the best tracker of your own nervous system. Very simple questions. What do you notice on the inside? And are they pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And as you're learning to try to stay with the pleasant or neutral sensations. And guess what? What we pay attention to grows. I've used the metaphor all over the world, and that is most of us have gardens, unless we're nomads. I have worked with some people that are in nomadic communities, but they still have to get their fruits and vegetables, but they may not grow them. But if you have seen a garden or grown your own garden, and you're planted, let's say seeds for vegetables, or maybe planted beautiful flowers, there's weeds in every garden. Are there weeds in your gardens and the community that you live in? And so I've never heard people say no. And so what would happen? And weeds can be medicinal, but what if you decided only to water the weeds in your garden and not the vegetables and the fruit and the flowers? They would not be as robust. They may not grow in the same way. And so it's kind of like my definition of resiliency, right? We can acknowledge that the weeds are there, and then we can shift our attention to paying attention and cultivating and watering um, our our resources, the well-being, like you saw me when I bring up my grandma and how that changes me. But the other thing that we've learned, and this was a study that came out of Finland, first of all, we talk about sensations. It's a physical experience in the body, and sensations originate in billions of receptors distributed in every part of the body. And you can see with these composite drawings. So what the researcher did is people watched they saw some pretty awful images, and then they had these blank composite drawings, and they were to color in. Um, the more activation in the nervous system was the red and the yellow. And if they were feeling less, it was the darker colors. And you can see with anger, for example, look at what happens to the hands. And this is what with the project we just did in the DJJ, they said, oh, the young people that are trained in the model, what we've seen happening is when they're noticing anger happening even with others, they're interceding and helping them try to pay attention to where their body is not feeling so much heat. And all of a sudden there's a shift as people are paying attention. So to know that every life experience, every thought, feeling, meanings that we have corresponding sensations in the body. And look at love. Look at happiness. Now, we don't have compassion here, but I have seen so many people talk about acts of compassion, and then what are you noticing in the body? And oh my goodness, the sensations that people describe are similar to the sensations that I described when I talked about my grandmother. But this is called interoceptive awareness. That's the fancy scientific term. So the insula is part of the brain that helps body and mind communicate to one another. So think about this. So today in California, it was cold. It was 42 degrees Fahrenheit. I walked outside only with a very slight little jacket. So when I walked outside, my body communicated to me physical state of cold, distress. So what did I do? I did a behavior. I went back inside and got a heavier coat and I got gloves. So when we start reading the nervous system, and we do it already, that it sends us into action. If we have an itch, we scratch it. So what we're doing with learning about interoceptive awareness, that greater body awareness is helping us have, and this is very important. Research has shown it promotes emotion regulation and clear thinking. It also can change our behavioral reactions. Instead of hot hands punching someone, I can learn to cool down, take that breath, that pause, and that no longer and maybe a violent act. How important this is for all of us around the world. So this is the choice that we have. And here's just a little drawing that I put together. The person noticed sensations, tension, heat, felt anger, high zone, used a skill, noticed pleasant sensations, cooling down, felt calmer, less tension. That's the recipe. It's very simple. So this is what I said earlier. It's always a choice to learn this. And here are all the sensory words, so many. And of course, we don't have time to look to say, oh, we're going to discover everyone today, but I'm going to lead you into a very, very small exercise. And I'm going to stop the share for just now. And you will remember this, Marilyn, when I was in India, I had the great honor of being with the children and helping them talk about their experiences with sea learning. And chapter 2 of sea learning is CRIM. And so the children, when I said, well, you want to teach something to all these adults in the room, and the children on their own said, oh, we have to teach them about tracking. And so I said, well, how do you want to teach them about tracking? And they all said this. Hand rubbing, it's so simple, Elaine. We can teach everybody this. So if you remember, there was a little girl that took the lead. She had everybody do this. I'm going to invite you to do it, is bringing your hands together and slowly start rubbing your hands together and to a place where you start feeling a change in temperature. I have to probably go pretty fast here for me. And as you feel that change in temperature, and I'm sensing a bit of heat, maybe some of you are too, you can stop and just notice the change. And is it still as hot as it was before, or has it gotten cooler? You can just nod as if it has. But this is a very simple tracking of just temperature. And temperature, oftentimes, just like with me, hot ears, it's something that I pay attention to. So learning about that language is very important. And Laura only did a very, very sweet demonstration with me for the next skill, which is resourcing, which is what we'll end with in terms of the two skills that we're teaching, then to open it up to more questions. So I'm going to just put the next slides back in. So Laura, and you saw her beautifully do this with me and demonstrate it already.
So we have talked about this resourcing opportunity. And do we have time to invite everyone to think about a resource?
I think if we did it in just a couple minutes, I think we could.
So I want you just to think about a resource. And again, this could be a positive memory, a person, or a place, as Elaine did. And just recognize what's going on inside you.
And maybe add some details to the resource, like you saw me add details to my grandma, right?
So if you think about the place and what the situation was and what the surroundings were and how that affected you, does everyone have a resource? Should we delve into an opportunity to explore that with our audience? I don't know that we have time to do that, but I want to just share that this resourcing is something that you can always, here's this beautiful resourcing recipe. You can take a moment and think about anything, but the descriptions, the tangible sensations is what we really want to experience. So again, we want to shift from the head to the body experience and describing what that's like. Marilyn, would you like to share a resource of your own?
Well, one that immediately comes to mind, obviously, um, in this house is a dog. Um, and I think, you know, the one dog that is just really special was Audrey, Audrey Celeste, named after not Catherine, Audrey Hepburn.
Mm.
She just had that that wonderful warm charm of an Audrey Hepburn. Um, she, if we had a gathering of people, she would make her way from one person to another, jump on their lap. She was a small little Bichon, and give them ample time to reward her, pet her, but also to bring warmth and joy to that person. So there's always that feeling of a holistic feeling of inclusion, warmth, tenderness, and comfort. So that's a great resource for me. I always turn to it, even
And
though there are other dogs that were before and are after.
And I've never seen Marilyn smile so much than when she's talking about this fur baby. So what are you noticing inside your body right now? You're bringing something up. How does that feel in your body? Is it pleasant? Is it
Oh yeah,
unpleasant?
of course. It's it's one of those wonderful memories. Like Elaine was sharing a memory of her grandmother, and oftentimes when somebody shares a memory, then other people latch onto it. So immediately I wanted to latch on to Elaine's and say, well, I had that same kind of relationship with my grandmother.
Mhm.
But you you allow yourself to go beyond and realize how many other nurturing moments and resources that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. I was noticing on the screen some of us were also reacting and mirroring perhaps that experience. So, can you imagine being able to draw on this resource when perhaps you are out of your well-being zone? Can you see how that can?
Yes, yeah, I can.
Well,
And it's kind of ironic because I think that, right now we have a very, very mischievous dog. And ironically, I talked to Elaine about her. Uh, she does everything that could be in a comic strip that you can't imagine. I mean, if you stay in one place long enough, she would be eating your trousers. I mean, but there's something about, like stopping yourself and then thinking about another dog. And it doesn't have to be Audrey Celeste, it could be any other dog. And it causes me oftentimes to dismiss that frustration that I have and go into that nurturing moment by thinking of, just that other experience.
well, it's so interesting as you say that we didn't get a chance to talk about our sixth skill, which is shift and stay. But
Mhm.
that's exactly what you just described, is that you can shift your awareness to that, again, that nourishing moment,
Mhm.
and that it deflects. I mean, it's not that the
Yeah.
other thing isn't true, but there is something else that's true as well. That's really beautiful, Marilyn.
Yeah.
And to Elaine's point, we don't have the luxury of going through all of the six skills on this call. I know we're going to be offering a training on this, I believe, the early part of the year, where we really delve into, again, really this somatic experience. So, grounding isn't something that we have time to go into in depth today, but just this notion of our body and the earth and ways that we can stabilize ourselves is yet another tool. And there are many, and like I said, they're easy to adapt into our lives and easy for kids to remember, easy for people in a busy work life, family life experience to remember and draw in, and frankly to start recognizing how we show up in the world. So when I think about, checking the headlines of today's news, and I start recognizing what it's doing to my body and how different news stations do different things to my body, and just being aware of that, and then recognizing for people who are nurturing themselves with this 24/7 what that does to the body, and how can we shift and realize it can do different things if we pay attention to that. So I want to make sure we allow, oh, go ahead, Elaine.
I just want to say that you'll be getting a copy. I don't know if you haven't gotten it yet of the PDF of this presentation. And there's about six slides that have to do with the resources, with the research, and that you can read on your own, and also how to go into our website where you can learn more about it. And so know that there's lots of other little goodies for you to look at, as well as I put two slides in there of Sam Habimana's study about the increase of compassion and forgiveness with the study he did with Rwandan survivors and perpetrators of the genocide, which is quite, I mean, it's like life altering for them. And of course, it was very amazing for me to see how these little simple wellness skills can cause that kind of shift.
So you can also see how this can be adapted to restorative justice, restorative practices, or building upon other infrastructures that you may already be working with. But this brings such a new dimension, and it's an aha, but it's also something that perhaps as humans we've always known and have forgotten. This beautiful body and brain and how it all works together. I just love that it is biology based, and that Elaine had the wisdom and the courage to share this with the world. So I just want to thank you, Elaine, for this and let
It's
everyone know on this call that this is really just a very light touch of what one can learn and into some deep dives of the way in which we manage our well-being zone and how we can expand and build that capacity so that as more things come our way, we're even better equipped.
I think I just want to say too, it's like it's really wonderful to bring this to children. And we have created all sorts of different modules, with CRIM for children. And certainly there's been other or school districts and after school programs they become CRIM teachers and integrate it. And of course with C Learning, having it integrated in chapter 2, that it really has been a very important part of that whole offering in helping children all over the world learn how to read their nervous system. That body literacy piece is so important.
One of the, I guess, challenges for everyone just here with us this morning is just to awaken sensory. So as you go about your day today, as you have your cup of coffee, smell the coffee, what does it mean? How do you experience it? If you go for a walk, if you get outside, if you have a difficult call, just start paying attention to awakening the sensory is, I think, a really important piece to learning the community resilience model. And so that's a beautiful, just little assignment for ourselves to be aware of how we're experiencing our life.
And who knows, maybe some of you like doing dishes like I do. I mean, so I'm always the one that volunteers. Oh, Marita, so are you in Mexico? Okay, great. I'm coming to Mexico, actually, to Monterrey in February.
Oh,
Yeah, are you
oh,
near Monterrey?
yeah, I live in Monterrey.
Oh my gosh,
Who
well
are
I'm
you
coming.
coming with?
So I'm
Who are
coming
you coming with?
yeah, I'm coming with the I met them through the C Learning program. Are you connected at all through them? Bernardo?
Yes,
Yes.
yeah,
Well, I'm
I
coming so
am.
maybe I can meet you in person and
Oh,
love
that
to.
would be
Yes, yes, yes. So
exciting.
I'll put my email in the chat and please reach
Yeah,
out to me because it would be nice to know another familiar face.
of
Um,
course, of
yes.
course. Yes, so I took the C learning course with them, and I went to Colombia, and I was with them last month
Oh,
here
great.
in a neighboring
Wonderful.
state. So yeah, yeah. So I'm very involved with the
Yeah,
C
so I'm going
learning
to be
program.
the keynote presenter at their conference that they're having.
Oh,
Yeah,
wonderful.
and doing a workshop.
Okay,
Okay,
so I'll be there.
great. Hopefully
Yes,
we'll meet in person. And then I'm
no
also
doubt about it. I'll be there.
and I'm coming to London in June for 10 days.
Hyacin.
Yeah, and that's through it's a charity that we're doing a project in Ethiopia. And so they're bringing
Might be able to see you there.
Ethiopian psychologists to learn our model as well. So we've had trouble getting them visas. It's a crazy time all over the world, but we could get visas in the UK, and the charity is in the UK. So, and then I'm going to walk the Camino. I am going to do that, Marilyn. I told you I'm going to. So, yes,
Wonderful.
I'm going to walk
So
the
I
Camino.
might be in London in June as well. So
Oh
that
my
would I
goodness.
would also
Well,
like to look up there
you all
if
have
possible.
my email address. So,
Yeah.
it's so lovely to meet people in person than I get to meet on Zoom. And I love going to London and Mexico. So,
Yeah. And I grew up in Spain and I've done part of the Camino, so
how are
we
you
have a lot in
doing?
common.
I'm going with my son. I'm so excited. So
How beautiful.
he's planning the whole thing. So we're going to meet in London and fly over to Spain, and he's going to do part of it on a bike ride, and I'm going to do part of it, and he's going to do part of it walking with me too. So I can't wait. Should be interesting.
We need to talk do a lot of talking. And yes, I was saying that I would really, really like to know more about the course. How can we get certified? What does the certification imply, or what are the prerequisites, and what do we come out with, kind of?
Do you want me to say a little bit about it? So, we have so basically it's a 5-day community resiliency model teacher training course that actually Laura just did. We offer them, and we're hoping that we can offer it online through the network here. And so in that 5 days of training, we do a deeper dive in learning all the skills. So you learn the skills first. You write about the skills. I really designed it based on adult learning theory. You write about it, and then you then you teach back to us. So you say, who am I going to teach this to? And then you create your modules like teaching the zones, some of the work we did today, and also some of the neuroscience, which sometimes is scary for people. And then at the end of the 5 days, you're what we call provisionally certified. And then that starts the process. And you can start teaching day 6 if we're becoming provisionally certified, because we encourage people to start teaching right away, because the more you teach the better that you get. But maybe the first, depending on who you are and how much teaching experience you have, you might want to just invite your family over and do a teaching, or like Laura, she did something a little bit bigger, but she's used to teaching, right? And she was able to adapt it very quickly in what she's doing. But the other thing is, it doesn't stop there. So you have consultations the first 3 months after the training, because as you implement anything, there's questions that you're going to have about implementation. The other thing that affords you is to be with your cohort and also other cohorts, because we literally have a global community. We have, and so there's also like a take-home assessment that you do. We want to make sure that you've got all the skills ready to go. And once you kind of finish these tasks, you become certified. And when you become, and actually, the moment that you are provisionally certified, we have something called Litmus, and it is a library, a learning library. So, for example, Marita, we have all the materials in Spanish. So you don't have to have things translated. You already have it there. And so that you can then go into the learning portal and say, oh, I want that. I'm going to use that slide, or I'm going to take that slide and I'm going to change it a little bit. So we have a number of languages in the learning portal. In fact, we just added Swahili. We have many projects in Africa. So that's been very exciting to have our litmus, which is available to all of you. And then the other thing that we have is we have monthly CRIM global calls, where sometimes, if you become a CRIM teacher, you may present at it and talk about what you're doing in terms of bringing this into the community. Like this coming month, we'll be having the International Covenant House has decided to adapt CRIM to all of
Right.
their centers for the unhoused all over the United States and Canada. And so the two people from the international, Regina and JRW, are coming to talk about what they're doing as their plan is to bring CRIM into a wider way, because of that little story that I told you, right? We started in Atlanta and they saw the changes in the children. And in fact, one of them I just saw in Atlanta when I was in there for the Emory event, and he's now finishing his bachelor's degree. He wants to be a doctor, and he was an unhoused transitional age youth, and he talks about learning the skills changing his life. So I have to say, they're so gratifying. But then you're part of that global community. And then we have ongoing offerings and also opportunities where once you become a certified CRIM teacher, people, we have let's say, we're going to have a project. We're going to be doing a project for Myanmar in Thailand. And so we have a CRIM teacher that's from London, actually, that's going to come to join us in that one. She works for Christian Aid. So then there's opportunities to do things with us. But then also what ends up happening is that you all create ideas of what you want to do in your own community. And so we try to support that by, technical assistance, so that you really become part of a community. It's not like, oh, a training's done, and then, that you're done with us. Well, you can be done with us if you want. Of course, we don't force ourselves upon you. But I think that the whole idea of this community that we have, that, Laura's part of our community. She's part of the charter, and she's doing beautiful things with her new organization, with academia. So it's always like so incredibly touching to me what people do with the model that I had no idea. I think the most amazing one was I was in South Africa a number of years ago, and I get an email from one of the CRIM teachers saying, Elaine, I just wanted to let you know we just trained all the game wardens. They're so traumatized by the large animals of our planet being harmed, right, and killed. And so it was really important for them to learn these skills as well. But I mean, I honestly, here I am from California. I never expected somebody that was going to be working with game wardens in South Africa to be able to bring this to them. So there's so many ways that it's been brought in. I mean, I sometimes think I sound like a used car salesman, because I get so excited what I've seen people do. And like, for example, the country of Angola, which has really pretty much does not have a mental health system. We train 50 community ambassadors. So far to date, they've trained 17,000 people in the skills, and it's providing such a whole community of people that know how to stabilize their nervous system. They have civil war there, colonialism there. And when I hear Luis, they speak Portuguese there too, as many other dialects. He told me about a time going into a place in Angola where there's no electricity and writing the zones with a stick on a soccer field and teaching the young kids about the zones. I mean, I hear that, it makes me so happy. And then what happened? This is the first time this has happened. We just trained the government of Angola. We trained 21 governmental officials to become crim teachers because they want to disseminate it in the entire country in their government. And they had a news conference when it was all online. I was a little person in the the Zoom conference that they did. They want to be the first trauma-informed country um, in Africa. So there's so much more to say, but if you become a crim teacher, I always just say, who knows what well will spring up in you. And certainly you're all dedicated, as we are in Tri, to cultivate compassion and ethical thinking and, the whole area of social justice and peacemaking um, is so integral because I think so much that happens in our world is undigested trauma. And when we know that the body really does keep the score, that the body is involved in it, but the body can balance the score, which is why I highlighted today for this short introduction, those resiliency circuits. It's very powerful for humans to know that we have that inside of ourselves. We sometimes often always focus on the trauma and the negativity and that question that I actually have had two staff members tattoo this on their body. What else is true? I thought that they want to be able to look at it to remind themselves because they've had their own experiences with trauma that they can show up in a different space in their world because of learning the sacredness of how we're designed. And do you remember Marilyn, that little girl? I'll never forget her because we asked them, well, what would you like to change about C learning? And she said, chapter 2 should be chapter 1. Because if you're not in your resilient zone, it's very hard to be compassionate. She was what, about 10 years old? I'll never forget that.
And this is just such a beautiful, I mean, you just heard the enormous, profound impact globally this has had individually and collectively on people. My hope is that this becomes ubiquitous language skills, just like saying, well, you're dehydrated, get a glass of water. Oh, your resilience zone is, let's like that. Everyone just can understand their agency of their own body circumstance. So it's a beautiful gift that you're sharing with the world, Elaine. I'm so grateful that we're able to introduce this to the charter. And I hope we have a beautiful cohort of new trained teachers through the charter so we can bring it through this global network that is the Charter for Compassion.
Great. Well, you certainly bridged to the end because we are at that time. And thank you, Elaine and Laura, for being here. And we'd love to hear from people who were on the call. If you're interested, because yes, we are going to be offering this as a course in hopes of certifying cohorts of people in different regions of the world. And we hope to start, as was also indicated, early in 2026. So thank you all for coming. And if you know of people that might be interested in this, we'll be sending out the link of this recording, and please share it with them. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. So good to meet you all.
Elaine and Laura, it was beautiful. Thank you
Bye,
very
Me
everyone.
much.
gusta, Marida.